Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
It's now 10 minutes past 8. Elections in this country are not a financial free-for-all. There are rules on how much a candidate can spend on their campaign to avoid the idea that anybody can buy their seat in Parliament. Those are the rules the Electoral Commission applied this morning when it announced it was fining the Conservatives £70,000 for irregularities in their reporting of expenses in the 2015 general election and 3 by-elections in 2014. It follows an investigation by Channel 4 News that the Conservatives' spending returns were not complete. Well, to tell us about her announcement, we're joined by Claire Bassett, who is Chief Executive of the Electoral Commission. Good morning.
Good morning.
Can you explain to us what the Conservatives did wrong? What did they not report properly?
So the investigations that we're reporting on today were into the party's national spending returns, looking at determining whether they'd accurately reported on spending on campaigning. And what we found was that at the 3 by-elections in 2014 and the UK parliamentary general election in 2015, there was a high number of errors and numerous failings in those reporting of that national spend. They related to money or spending that was missing from the spending returns, but also to spending that was misreported in those returns.
And are you suggesting that this was done deliberately or was just a mistake, an error?
Well, what we did is we looked to establish what had been spent and the records for that. We were unable to find accurate records for quite a high amount of spending, and we sought to get that from the party. We obviously don't know what the intention behind that was, but the Treasurer was required to sign the declaration of what had been spent, and that was clearly not accurate.
But you are not saying whether you think he knew it wasn't accurate.
That's the reason why we have referred this to the police, because that would be a criminal offence if he knowingly or recklessly signed that declaration. So that's a matter for the police to investigate.
And to explain, there has been part of this story is based around the battle bus. The Conservatives sent a battle bus which was paid for by central office, by the National Party, but it was effective in different constituencies. Is that the core of your investigation?
There are 3 elements to our investigation. That's one of them. The battle bus is related to the activity of the people on that battle bus and whether that activity was about the national campaign in the election or whether it was about promoting the local candidates. The other elements of our investigation were around South Thanet and also the actual accuracy of the overall returns.
And as far as South Thanet is concerned, which is of course where Nigel Farage was standing, did you talk to Nick Timothy? He's now the Prime Minister's Chief of Staff, but he was working in South Thanet at the time.
No, we didn't. What we were looking at is how spending was apportioned and the people responsible for reporting on that spending.
And so as far as, so in terms of what your eventual finding was, because you came to the conclusion that the Conservatives should be fined £70,000, how does that break down effectively in the mistakes that they made?
So the £45,000 worth of that fine relates to the 3 by-elections, £20,000 for the first, £15,000 for the second and £10,000 for the third. A following £20,000 was for the UK parliamentary general election spending return and the failures of that, and then the remaining £5,000 was for the missing invoices and receipts for spending at the parliamentary general election as well.
Now, the Conservative Party have given a response saying they complied fully with your investigation. They'd pay the fine. It was the first time the party had been fined for a reporting error. And as we have consistently said, the local agents of Conservative candidates correctly declared all local spending in the 2015 general election. Does all that chime with your experience?
So I think the first thing to say is that we're obviously very pleased that the Conservatives have accepted this findings and will be paying the fine. It has been quite a protracted investigation, and some of that has been because we have had some difficulty in getting information from the party, and indeed had to resort to seeking a court order at one point. So it has been a difficult process, but I think we're pleased to have got where we are now. In terms of the activity
Sorry, just forgive me for interrupting. So they were not compliant. You had to go to the court to get the Conservative Party to hand over the information you needed.
Yes, we did, yes.
As far as the battle bus is concerned, is it your understanding that they were deliberately using the battle bus because there is a more generous limit on spending at the national level than at the constituency local level?
So again, we didn't go to the intention, but what we looked at was the spending that was reported in the national spending reports for that battle bus. What we found was that some spending was actually missing, so was not reported at all, and other spending that was reported at national spending could well have been candidate spending. We only focus on the national spending, and we looked at that, and we identified that some of the activity that was taken out by the people on those battle buses could be considered to be work on behalf of the local candidates.
And should have been known at the time?
Well, that will be a matter for the police investigation. So the police will be looking at the candidate's return and what happened there. So that will be a matter for the police and the CPS.
It sounds like a mess from what you're saying.
Certainly, we're very disappointed by the lack of robust processes and the party's inability to provide accurate and comprehensive information, and not having those robust, appropriate systems in place. And we'd be very pleased if they're putting those in place now.
You make the point that you are effectively responsible. You only look at the national picture. You will know that there is a separate investigation by police forces of Conservative MPs. We spoke to the Conservative MP Roger Gale this morning, who questioned the timing of this announcement from you, saying that it could prejudice, unfairly affect those different investigations that are going on into Conservative MPs.
That isn't a concern that we share. I think we have worked very closely with the police and CPS and shared our information with them through this. I think it's important to remember that this investigation has been going on for some time, and there's a number of people affected by it who have been very concerned about what the content of our report would be. So we've published it, as we have done with the other two investigations that we've conducted, as soon as we're ready to do so, and I think that's the right thing to do.
Of course, one of the reasons this matters, one of the reasons these rules are in place, is to ensure that people don't have an unfair advantage, that the right person won the election. Can you say that in these cases?
I don't think that's for us to make a judgment on, particularly because of the separation between the National Party and the candidate and the separate investigations going on at candidate level. I think what does matter and what's really important is that we have a transparent system that's open to scrutiny, and that's a fundamental part of having a healthy democracy, and these tests are part of that, and that's why we're doing this today and why we're looking for those higher sanctions as well.
But you wouldn't have got onto it if it weren't for the investigation by Channel 4 News.
Well, one of the things that I think the Commission does very well is that we take a completely transparent approach to this. So what we do is we publish spending returns as soon as we're able to. So that's usually about 8 weeks after we receive them from parties and campaigners. And that allows anybody to look at and analyse and challenge the returns that have come in to us. And then we also, at the same time, conduct our own investigations, and the findings of other people and other people's concerns will feed into that, as they did in this case.
Claire Bassett, thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's now 19 minutes past 8, and at this point, well, indeed earlier, we were supposed to be talking to Sir Oliver Letwin, Conservative MP, former Cabinet Office Minister, about the great budget shambles, if we can refer to it as that in those terms. But, Sir Oliver, good morning to you.
Good morning.
And clearly we must address this hugely important issue that Sarah's just been talking about. Your immediate reaction as a Conservative MP, former Cabinet Minister?
Well, obviously it's disappointing to see that the Conservative Party has now followed the Labour and Liberal Democrat Party in being fined by the Electoral Commission for inaccuracies in the reporting.
A record fine?
Yes, indeed, and it's very, very important, I think, that all political parties in Britain do have what was being described there by the Electoral Commission as fully transparent and properly documented returns, because we have incredibly tight spending limits in the UK by comparison with almost anywhere, and that does mean that actually, by comparison, say, with what goes on in the States, our elections are largely not about huge spending and not about trying to sort of buy votes and great TV campaigns and so on. I think if you're going to operate a system like that, which I suspect you and I and most of your listeners would agree we should continue to operate, then obviously you have to have very tight rules, and it's important that they be enforced. I think it's also very important that they be clarified as far as possible, so everyone knows exactly what they do have to do.
Well, everyone does know if they care to take the trouble to find out, don't they? That's the point. And it's pretty unlikely, to say the very least, isn't it, that there could have been such a tiny group of people in the party who knew what was going on. Others must surely have known what was happening.
When you say you know what was going on, I haven't read the detail of the Electoral Commission report, but as far as I can understand, we're talking about something like 0.5% of the total spending of the National Party.
Well, that's not really the point, is it? I mean, the fact is the Conservative Party has agreed to pay a fine of £70,000 and police forces are now investigating. So therefore, it's perfectly clear that something wrong happened. We just heard that from the Commissioner herself.
Clearly something wrong happened in the sense that there was, as in the case of the other parties and the other fines, misreporting. But, you know, all three parties are not likely to have misreported because there's some great conspiracies going on.
Well, we don't know that.
Like, well, no, I agree. We don't ultimately know that until all these investigations are complete, and it's very right they should carry forward. But actually, it seems to me very likely that what we're talking about here is people not having completely accurate systems. And if you're going wrong by about 0.5%, that's wrong. You have to put it right. You have to have accounting systems that are actually perfect, or as near perfect as human beings can make them. But I don't think you should conclude from this that there's some great conspiracies in all our political parties. I don't actually believe that.
Well, the worry, and Sir John Holmes, who chairs the Electoral Commission, has expressed this concern. The worry is that some political parties might come to view the payment of these fines as a cost of doing business.
Well, you're doing a very good job of making sure that doesn't happen, and rightly so. It's important that we focus on this politically and that it is made a fuss about, because it's important we get it exactly right, and that people don't feel that, as you say, you know, it's a cost of doing business. That's not the right approach, not the approach the Conservative Party, I'm glad to say, has taken this morning from what I have seen of the announcements.
But wouldn't we be more impressed by that if we saw the Conservative Party feeling a few collars at this stage rather than waiting for the entire legal process to come to its end? Of course, there has to be a legal process if that's what is decided, if a prosecution is agreed upon. But in the meantime, surely at the very least, the Conservative Party should go a little bit further than saying we've paid the fine, and incidentally saying we have cooperated entirely, which is not the impression we got from the Commissioner. We heard her speaking just then. Surely they should be saying we are investigating it robustly ourselves, and people will be suspended during that process.
Well, no, John, you and I have both for a long time, I remember having conversations about this 15 or 20 years ago, been huge supporters of the idea of the rule of law, and that means you try to do things which are in accord with the law, but you also obviously respect individual rights, and you don't go chasing for people who may be completely innocent of anything. And my suspicion here is that actually there isn't any guilty party or somebody who's trying to do something wrong.
Because they've agreed to pay a fine of £70,000.
No, John, that was levied, and rightly levied, because of things which were not correctly recorded. Now, those are mistakes, and it's bad to make mistakes, and it's right that we should have a system that demands that the right systems be put in place, as with the other two parties, which also made mistakes. I don't think any of the parties is currently chasing for villains, because I don't think there were any villains here in any of the parties. I think what we've seen is people making a whole series of human errors, and that's bad, and it should be corrected, and the system shouldn't enable those errors to be made, but it doesn't mean that there's some vast criminal conspiracy going on.
Oliver Letwin, thank you very much indeed. And let's turn now to Laura Kunzberg, our political editor. A quick thought, if you would, on the fine, the £70,000 fine from the Electoral Commission.
Well, I think on the indeed, I mean, this is also going to be a big headache. On the core issue of whether the Tories deliberately used their national battle bus, the campaigning muscle of the National Party, to get extra cash into local campaigns by the back door. You know, they get a stern rap on the knuckles over that, but I think the party will be enthusiastically pointing out the Electoral Commission hasn't found evidence of some kind of conspiracy on that. However, there's huge political risk here about what happens next. 12 police forces process have passed files to the CPS. The Electoral Commission has now referred the National Party to the Met Police and spelling out in black and white that they believe an offence may have been committed. Now, of course, depending what happens at the CPS, what their decisions are, we could potentially be looking at by-elections here.
Yes.
And when, as we've just seen in the last 24 hours, the Tories have difficulties because they have a wafer-thin majority, any by-election could make a big difference to what happens next.
Laura, thank you very much.